Breaking reality, moral dilemmas in Rick and Morty. If you have binge-watched Rick and Morty, then you know it's a wild ride. From interdimensional travel to time-splitting paradoxes, this show does so much more than blow your mind with real science fiction. It really takes a hard look at some pretty deep moral and ethical questions. It's one of those few shows that does not run away from the big stuff, even if it gets completely absurd, with becoming a pickle for no apparent reason. There's always something of an ethical message wrapped in the chaos. Now, let's break it down. What makes Rick and Morty different when it comes to moral dilemmas? How do these absurd scenarios mirror real-life ethical challenges? More importantly, why should we care so much about what a drunken scientist and his impressionable grandson do in their free time? Of course, first and foremost comes Rick Sanchez. Rick is the classic nihilist, in that he does not believe in much other than his own genius. He keeps informing whoever is listening that really nothing matters in the grand scheme of things, so long, of course, as there are infinite universes out there to access.
How did I end up not in my own universe?
That don't care kind of attitude gives him freedom to do as he pleases, often at others' expense. It is also what raises the use of such a grand moral question. Does it not follow that, if nothing of this or anything truly matters, are we entitled to do as we like? It's not about being anti-authority or anti-social mores. It's about the far deeper analysis of what happens when you take away a higher moralizing framework. The universe, fundamentally, doesn't really have meaning. In some respects, Rick represents the ultimate existential crisis. He's literally a walking argument for moral nihilism, the belief that values are, in fact, illusions propped up by societies desperate to make sense of the chaotic universe. And boy does Rick tear that apart. Which, of course, now brings us to the ultimate life problem. Can you live like Rick, knowing that life means absolutely nothing without causing harm to others? Can you justify morally putting your caprices ahead of everybody else's if it doesn't matter on a cosmic scale? This rings into our world in terms of environmental destruction, political apathy, and corporate greed. Persons, companies, and governments act out of self-interest and dust off the long-term repercussions. If the world is going to end anyway due to climate change, nuclear war, or whatever apocalypse, why bother? Rick's selfish escapism falls square into that mindset, further forcing us to question whether nihilism is stable or, in fact, even justifiable. But even with an utterly absurd regard for morality, Rick is not completely insensitive to emotional or ethical turmoil either, as we shall see in the next family dynamics of Smiths. While Rick's nihilism invites questions of morality in an indifferent, cold world, he also opens the door to a greater debate about what heroism, or more often anti-heroism, means. As we work our way through this headlong rush of an adventure, it cannot but strike how painful it is to be as intelligent and capable as Rick is. Not only to himself, but also to those who end up with him through that ceaseless journey. While Rick is often characterized as the smartest man in the universe, this show isn't above showing the moral costs of his genius. He isn't exactly a hero by traditional standards. He's actually consistently walked that line between being the main character and the villain many times. In any case, whatever his true nature may be, characters, especially Morty, tend to look up to him anyway.
You figured out that crazy solution like you always do. Whew!
Which begs the question, can a man as morally compromised as Rick ever really be considered a hero? Many episodes have Morty stuck between following Rick or employing his conscience. Certain consciences, such as the Whirly-Durly conspiracy episode when Morty travels through a lawless amusement park with his dad and Rick, plague him quite persistently. As the series progresses, Morty learns that more often than not, aligning himself with Rick leads to personal misery or the misery of others. But it isn't just Morty who reaches these ethical junctions. Summer, Jerry, even Beth, just about everybody has to struggle with the morality of their association with Rick. Consider the Meeks Box from the episode Me Seeks and Destroy.
This is a Meeks Box.
The idea is simple. Summon a Mr. Meeks to help solve a problem, and they disappear once they complete their task.
I'm Mr. Meeks! Look at me!
Things spiral out of control when Jerry employs the box in an effort to better his golf game. What started out as a simple tool for self-help escalates into a nightmarish situation where the Meeks, after desperately wanting to die since their purpose was complete, begin to unravel. That's in itself a commentary on the often considered ramifications of looking for ways to cut corners around deeper personal problems. Think about how many times we settle for quick fixes in life, whether in political clampdowns, self-improvement, or even in the manner in which we handle other people. From self-help books promising us instantaneous success to governments hurrying policies without ever considering the aftermath of such decisions, it alludes to a real-life moral dilemma. Where is it right to look out for immediate respite and temporary solutions when it may cost us long-term repercussions? Can it be ethical to further personal interest if it is going to hurt other people sometime later? The use of absurdist conceit does not stop there. Another layer of moral questions can be evinced in the brutal deconstruction of the show undertakes without much ado for more conventional notions such as family and loyalty.
Ugh, you're back.
Oh shit, season 2, Jerry.
Look.
But as Rick draws Morty and the rest of the family into his questionably moral adventures, it becomes clear that heroism, or lack thereof, isn't the only thing hanging in the balance. The tangled family dynamics of the show further complicate. What role does loyalty play in maintaining relationships with morally compromised individuals? One of the ever-pressing themes for Rick and Morty has to be family dynamics between the Smiths and how Rick displaces their function. More often than not, Rick's influence only amplifies the dysfunction native to his family, but in doing so, it forces some deeply disturbing moral conundrums concerning loyalty and obligation.
No, I don't trust you. I don't want to do this anymore.
At what point does one take a step back and say that family is not always first? What if this family member is toxic or even destructive? Take, for instance, his relationship with his daughter, Beth. Obviously, Beth idolizes Rick and furiously enables the worst of his behavior through unresolved issues regarding his abandonment.
We need to do the right thing. Do what you never did as a dad.
But is that any excuse for her to continue to take him back into her life after the chaos he creates time and time again? What of Morty, who gets dragged along on adventures constantly, most of the time with no say in it? In the ABCs of Beth, we enter the mind of a grown-up Beth as she reconnects with the imaginary friend of her childhood, which has turned out to be a real, monstrous creature.
Look at some of the shit you were asking me to make you as a kid.
Rick's refusal to give his daughter a stable childhood now haunts her as an adult.
I have a defiance? Oh God, I'm a clone.
Beth's invariable search to get her father Rick's approval raises two questions on the nature of parental responsibility and if ever the scars of abandonment are to be overcome. This is a real morality play about family obligations. To what extent do we extend family loyalty in light of our own needs and boundaries? In most instances, we may be called upon to forgive and forget where family is involved. But Rick and Morty challenges whether or not blind loyalty is healthy or moral. But family loyalty is not the only one of many moral puzzles in the show. The question of identity and existence itself becomes very valid considering the multiverse. While the struggles of the Smiths against the corrosive influence of Rick are far from typical, the show pushes one step further to add even more complexity to the concept of the multiverse. In a reality where for every possible choice, there's an infinity of pathways getting explored, in which every version of yourself performs an alternative version of your life, what does making an ethical decision even mean? And more importantly, does it matter? One of the main premises of Rick and Morty comes in the form of something called the multiverse.
Let's go, in and out, 20 minutes adventure.
An infinite number of parallel realities in which every possible version of you exists. Sounds cool on paper, but the implications from an ethical standpoint are huge. If every possible decision you could make is happening somewhere, does that diminish the value of your choices? Take, for instance, the Rick Potion number 9 episode, where Rick brews a potion of love that eventually mutates most of Earth's population into disgusting creatures. Instead of trying to fix the situation, Rick and Morty abandon their reality to settle into another reality which is almost identical, where they both died, sliding into their alternate selves' lives.
Shut up and listen to me! It's fine! Everything is fine!
It's one of the show's most jarring moments. Once singular, the characters are now forced to come to terms with the reality that their lives are one of many and easily replaceable. That creates an extreme moral crisis. If you can just hop to another reality where things ever get too messy, then are your actions of any real consequence? If you can abandon the consequences of any action, is there any true moral responsibility?
I certainly didn't do it any favors, and for what it's worth, I'll apologize to...
For Rick, the answer is often no. But for Morty and many viewers, that raises some thrilling questions about responsibility and consequence. In the real world, we don't have the luxury of making an escape into the multiverse, but the peculiar plot device still resonates. Think about how, in this world, people dodge just about anything through wealth or privileged position. Everything from companies dodging accountability by relocating individuals and using power to escape justice. The moral dilemma of skipping realities is not really that far removed from reality after all. Just as the multiverse raises moral questions of responsibility, the utilization of technology in the show further opens certain ethical canyons, especially that of power and autonomy. Just as the multiverse tests the grades of choice and consequence, a device in Rick's hand is one for total control. But this in turn opens completely different questions. What happens if you create worlds, beings, or technologies for your gain? And where do we draw the line between innovation and exploitation? From cloning to controlling a mind to engineering an entire micro-universe, it plays with the idea of technology as a means of ultimate control. And once you can literally play God, ethical questions are inevitable. The best example is the episode The Ricks Must Be Crazy.
I do have one emergency solution that I can use that'll...
Wherein it is revealed that Rick has built an entire miniature universe simply to keep his car battery going. In this micro-universe, the inhabitants have no idea that they are essentially living in servitude to Rick. This is an interestingly sharp commentary on the ethical levels of technological will. Where does it go from convenience to exploitation, where there is no realization on the part of those being exploited that they are in fact being exploited? Does it even matter? This becomes very relevant today with the development and advancement of artificial intelligence and automation. We already face those crucial decisions involving emerging technology that threatens to undermine employment, violate personal data, and even violate human rights. If we can do this and have the capability to make machines or software perform tasks on our behalf, does this mean we ought to? What does that say about our ethical obligation when we utilize technology where the consequences are far-reaching? Having set up the idea of power and autonomy in relation to technology, we shift the focus of our paper now onto how the show engages with deeper philosophical questions concerning the self.
I'm tired of believing you. I want to talk to her.
No, you do.
But while the ethical implications of technologies are already immense, Rick and Morty doesn't stop there. The show pushes it further by begging the question as to what it truly means to be ourselves. As Rick's creations start to blur the line between man and machine further and further, it begs us to ask what defines the self if bodies and memories can so easily be tampered with or replicated. One of the more philosophical aspects of the show has to be the constant questioning of identity in Rick and Morty. What makes you, you? Is it your memories, your choices, or something deeper? That gets excavated pretty deeply in the episode Total Recall, where parasitic aliens implant false memories into the Smith family's minds. The Smiths start to question who's real and who's fabrication. And the show plays this as a pretty darkly comedic episode. But it raises an honest ethical and philosophical question. How do we determine the real from the fake in our lives? If your identity is malleable or even rewritable, does that change your moral responsibility in some way? Another example would be when Rick created a robotic duplicate to replace him after his death to continue doing his jobs. This now begs the question, where is the line drawn between the real Rick and the robotic copy of him? If the robot acts the same way as Rick, identical in his mannerisms, then does that make him really him? And if so, what would that say about the concept of the soul or personal essence? These questions of identity and selfhood have never perhaps been more cognate than in today's world of deep fakes, social media personas, and genetic engineering. How much of what we experience online is the real person, and how much is a carefully constructed facade? And if we cede to control our personal narratives, do we also cede control of our moral responsibilities? In general, the search for identity, technology, family, and heroism all meet at one junction in Rick and Morty, the question of moral negotiation within the frames of an apparently absurd world. Though it leaves us with more questions than answers, the ceaseless dissection of these dilemmas reminds us that our choices still matter, even against an indifferent universe. At the end of the day, Rick and Morty doesn't hand us easy answers to the moral dilemmas it raises. It's a show that gets off on absurdity. But through that comes thought-provoking into some of the most difficult ethical questions of our time. What is the meaning of life, the nature of identity, or the ethics of technology? The show doesn't let us off the hook with these questions. What keeps each episode appealing, being a science fiction story, is mostly because of the humor in it. In a world where we often find ourselves face to face with our moral crises, from climate change to upheaval in the political world, this show holds a mirror right up and asks, what would one do if nothing really mattered? And therefore, crucially, what if you're wrong? Ultimately, the show really leaves us with an existential unease. But perhaps that is the point. After all, if we can laugh without cosmic absurdity, maybe that makes us better prepared to cope with the moral dilemmas in our reality.